This is the light which shall give revelation to the Gentiles, the mystery of God in the world, for the salvation of the world.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Glad Trad podcast. I'm Jordan Pacheco, and today I'm very happy because I am joined by my friend and fellow coworker and filmmaker extraordinaire, Solenne Santiago. Solenne, thanks so much for coming on. I'm excited to do this because I know that you've been a YouTuber for a long time, and fun fact, audience, you should check out her channel. It's called The Turtle Girl. You have, 134,000 subscribers? So you're like actually a legit YouTuber.
A little bit of a legit YouTuber. I haven't posted in a while, but you know, that's what happens when you get a full-time job in filmmaking.
That's right. Hey, do you have a play button?
I do.
Hey, that's great. Look at that, for 100,000 subscribers. That's awesome.
That's me.
Well, little did you know, audience, it's the old switcheroo. That's actually my silver play button. No, I'm just kidding. Totally just kidding. I'm sorry. You should be justly proud. As I've said, check it out. What do you do on Turtle Girl? I want people to know.
Yes, so it's an educational pet channel where I talk about how to take care of your exotic pets. I've got turtles. I had an axolotl. I have a leopard gecko. I've got snakes, the whole thing, but it's a lot of fun. But I think we're here to talk about Catholic filmmaking because that's more of your audience's jam.
So, Solenne, you made this short film called Faith Prevails, and if I remember correctly, I'll let you kind of tell the story, but let's just start back at the beginning, because I think that you're one of those really cool lights in what I call the reclamation, right? I sometimes use this term, this proto-renaissance I see with all these Catholic creators, whether they're filmmakers or composers or artists, right? I've actually met iconographers, which is really, really weird. But tell me a little bit about what Faith Prevails is. I will definitely play the trailer and link it for all the audience, and just give me kind of a brief overview.
Sure. So Faith Prevails is a Catholic short film. It is based around the story of the Eucharistic miracle of Bolsena. And it was all independently produced by myself and some of my friends. I was in high school at the time. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, it's following this story of this Eucharistic miracle. And it was actually a project for American Heritage Girls, which is a scouting organization I'm a part of. And so that was kind of like the prompting to do it. But then it became just so much more than I ever expected. It was actually my first ever attempt, shall we say, at any sort of narrative filmmaking. As Jordan mentioned, I have a YouTube channel, so that was kind of like my background in videography. But this was my first time dipping my toes into the filmmaking world. And it was just a whole new experience. So lots of struggles, lots of challenges, but also just a lot of beautiful fruit that came from it. And I'm really glad to have just kind of been a part of it. It honestly, a lot of the times it felt like I was just along for the ride.
So one thing that's kind of crazy is that when we all think about our high school projects, Catholic or not, they're things that nobody wants to see and nobody wants to show. But something that I very much like about yours is that despite your age and not really making a ton of short films in the same way that some of us who are filmmakers did, it's great. Like, it is, especially since I've spent so much time in Hollywood, like I've seen the process, toe to tip, how people get their shorts and their web series and all this kind of stuff out. What was your background for that? Because I got my first camera in like first grade. I was doing Lego movies. I was always in love with movies. I was making stuff that nobody's ever going to see, right? I went to film school later, like all that kind of jazz. So when I saw your project for the first time, I was thinking about what I was making at your age and just kind of like, it was nothing close to quality or to story or to these sorts of things, the ability to organize all of it. So just was there a lot of preparation? I mean, you have your YouTube channel, of course, but it's not a film YouTube channel, right? So it was like you're dipping your toes in this whole new world in a way.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, I would just say for me, it was always, and kind of just throughout my whole life, I've always been a bit of a researcher. And when I like get into something, I get into something. So like I started with YouTube and that was pretty successful up until this point. And I was also like a participant in theater kind of stuff. And so when I was like, well, what am I going to do for this project? I thought, well, what's basically like kind of theater, acting, narrative storytelling and video? Well, make a movie. And so I kind of just dived straight in, watched so many YouTube videos. I basically taught myself that entire summer. This was the summer of 2020. So it was actually a bit of a perfect time to be learning such things because we were all kind of stuck at home. And I kind of just dove into the deep end and learned about, different shots and how they tell stories and how to adapt a script into a screenplay. Because the cool thing with the film is it's actually based off of a play that our parish priest wrote that we used to put on for the Feast of Corpus Christi. And so that was a bit of the impetus for it. Is that the right word? I think that's the right word.
That's $1 million word too.
Yes, I think it was the impetus for it because we had done this play as kids, but then we stopped doing it because it took too much effort, for someone to plan it every year. But I was like, if we make it as a movie, then we can just have it, do all the work up front, and then it'll kind of live on forever. And so that was kind of the whole idea behind it. But it was very much just a lot of research, a lot of learning, a lot of just figuring it out. As they say, fake it till you make it. And that's honestly what it felt like a lot of the time, was just, how do I get this done? How do I cast people and find actors? How do I make a shot list? I knew my editing software, which was nice, but like, how do I kind of pull this whole thing together in post-production? And how do I get music? And so it was very much just asking these questions and then also trying to determine people who knew what they were doing in filmmaking and trying to find like mentors and people who could help me, which, to be honest, there was not very many at this stage of my, I suppose, foray into filmmaking. Most of it was just like YouTube, and that was like my biggest teacher, was just all of these different people that were making content on YouTube for free that kind of gave me my education, my self-made film degree, if you will, to figure out how to kind of get this thing done.
You and I both know how much effort it takes to get anything across the finish line. Your own YouTube video, editing a podcast, it doesn't really matter. Like there is certain degrees of effort that things take. In this case, it wasn't just you out there with your camera and that's it, right? You actually had actors and props and sets and that sort of thing. So I'm just kind of curious because, again, I meet a lot of Catholic filmmakers in this case who have ideas, right? But have no idea to how to pull it off or why to pull it off. You did. And it's okay if this takes 1,000 years, but how did you do it essentially is what I'm so curious about. Like, how did you in high school do something that adults in Hollywood that I shoot for don't do,
Well, I would say it's kind of like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so it was very much just kind of starting off, making just a whole list of like, this is all the stuff that needs to get figured out. And then kind of just tackling that one by one. I think the other thing that really helped was that it was like an accountability thing, because this was for like a specific project for this group that I was a part of. And so it was like, I get this done or I don't. And not that I was like going to let people down if I didn't get it done, but it very much felt like once you kind of embark on this thing, and I'm a doer, right? So it's like, you say you're going to do something, you just do it. And so it was very much just figuring it out. I keep saying this. It was very much just a process of kind of taking all of these production tasks, taking all of these things to do, kind of making a grand master plan, a bit of a timeline, and then just doing it. Saying, hey, Mom, I want you to be my first AD, whatever that means. Hey, Katie, one of my friends, can you be my boom mic operator? And so first of all, just like pulling all the different people around me to kind of surround me as my team. Because one of the biggest parts actually that I learned was, if I want to get this done, as much as I like to have control, I cannot do it on my own. That would be impossible. And yes, I wore a lot of hats, but definitely this film would not have happened if it were not for all the people who volunteered their time. And in another way, I think that's why COVID was kind of a blessing in disguise. Can I say that, by the way? Is that allowed?
You can't say that. What, COVID was a blessing in disguise?
No, COVID, coronavirus. Remember when that was a thing?
Oh, you mean the Wu flu, the Shanghai shivers, the commie cough.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But anyway, COVID was a bit of a blessing because, my friends like didn't have stuff really to do over the summer, or they were freed up because they didn't have other commitments at the time. And so to ask them to commit to, hey, I'm going to need like 2 weeks straight of your time or whatever to help me with this production, they were really free and able to say yes. And I think that was a part of the whole providential part of this project. I think there was just a lot of puzzle pieces that fell into place. that were kind of just thanks to the Holy Spirit guiding this. Because again, it's very much like, hey, Solenne, you know how to like work a camera, you know how to edit. The rest of this stuff was all completely new to me. But the saying that I really like and kind of always come back to is Dallas Jenkins, the creator of The Chosen. What he always says is, God doesn't ask you to feed the 5,000. He only asks you to bring the loaves and the fish. And so for me, it was like, well, here's my loaves and fishes. I don't really know what I'm doing, God, but I know that this is a good thing. And then the other part of it was too, is that I did not see anyone on anything make a Eucharistic miracle sort of movie. I know there's been a couple of things that have been like in pre-production and stuff that are kind of focused around Eucharistic miracles. There's like Presence on Formed, but I had never seen, at least in my research, even preliminary for this thing, like a Eucharistic miracle film that's kind of a narrative storytelling of a Eucharistic miracle. And I think that's just such a powerful aspect of our faith. And so once I saw, for one, that hadn't been done, it really kind of made me want to find a way to bring this to people, even if it wasn't like completely perfect, which, the movie is far from perfect, but in the end, like you said, like it's done. And it's something that's out there for people to see, which I think is pretty cool.
Getting it done has now earned you a spot in the completely non-existent realm of Catholic filmmaking. No, I'm just kidding. There's actually a lot of really cool parts of what I call like the proto-Renaissance, right? And so what do you kind of, when you look out to be a Catholic filmmaker, is that something that, I guess, a title that you wanted per se? Like, do you, in your filmmaking pursuits, if you think like this, is it important to be a Catholic filmmaker? Is it important just to be a filmmaker that happens to make Catholic stories? What do you kind of want for yourself? And then what do you kind of see out there right now in this budding world of new methods?
For me, I would say that always the outlet of filmmaking, I've always desired it to be something that is related to faith, because the transcendental is truth, beauty, and goodness. And like, what better way to kind of paint a picture with those, or rather shoot a picture with those, than with like filmmaking and narrative storytelling, and even documentary storytelling and all these different types of films that we have, which is honestly why I think it's such a blessing to be at the AI, as I'm sure you would concur, to be able to make stuff that is kind of for the new evangelization. I think in the media, we see that there's just like a lot of trash out there right now, and a lot of stuff influencing people, especially the generation coming after me, because I'm not a child anymore, which is weird to say. But definitely, I think that there is a great need for truth and goodness and beauty to be in the world of digital media, whether that be filmmaking, whether that be social media. It's just this space that is taking up so many people's time, that is taking up so much of people's time. I mean, even myself, I'm guilty of this. I'm like, I look at my phone screen time. It's like, wow, I spent like 2 hours just looking at random videos on Instagram Reels, or I don't know, like TikTok, if your viewers are on TikTok. Probably not. And that's probably a good thing.
Just carrier pigeons, quills, and ink, if I remember correctly. Trad to the end.
You know what? That is way, way better. But I think it's just the digital space is so saturated with stuff that is not good for our souls, not good for our minds, and just not good for forming good consciences, good habits, anything like that. And so I think the whole idea is like, if there isn't good Catholic filmmaking in this space, it's just going to be a void that fills with more bad things. And so I think to combat that, we need more good Catholic content, which is why I'm a huge fan of your podcast, because that's part of what it does, right?
Wow, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you kindly. No,
You're welcome.
You say something so true there, and something that a mutual friend of us has talked about is that to be a Catholic filmmaker, right, to tell stories perhaps from a Catholic lens, is not like a good film is not the absence of bad, right? Oh, we're going to take out language and sexuality and violence, and then whatever you're left over, it's a good movie. But I think what makes Catholic filmmaking very unique is it, on one hand, just in terms of religion, because Catholics know that by their own volition, they can choose to reject their salvation. There's an element of risk and source. I mean, your your movie directly plays with this, right? Because the entire miracle revolves around the fact that this priest is doing his duties as a priest, but he is doubting, correct, the real presence of the Eucharist. And I find, have you ever seen films like God's Not Dead, by the way?
Not.
You're fortunate. Do not worry. Now, the same two people who made God's Not Dead actually later made Nefarious. So I think they've kind of redeemed themselves, but they're Catholics, which I was horrified when I discovered. And this is why I'm very much big that no matter how the future looks for Catholic filmmakers, it's not cool for us to take the Protestant shilling, or in this case, Angel Studios, right? The Chosen. Those are Mormons. And I remember watching Sound of Freedom. There were a couple of Catholic elements that were toned just enough to get, but right, they were toned down just to chill on, which is why this Cabrini film coming out I'm very excited about, because it seems like it's deeply Catholic. So I kind of look out on this landscape myself, and I think of films like yours, and in your case, you gained a lot of traction organically. And I want you to speak into that, because I know a lot of filmmakers who they can shoot something, they can write something, they can have the quality even, but how do you get 500,000 views? How do you get people translating it into different languages for their friends and stuff?
Sure, totally. Yeah, I think, and it's kind of funny because I've been listening to Catechism in a Year actually, and I don't remember what episode I'm on. I'm pretty like on track. I think I'm on like day 250 something. But one thing that was said in the podcast that I was listening to, see and feel a need. And like I mentioned, I think that it was like, no one has made a Eucharistic miracle movie. There are videos on YouTube, and like my YouTube background, right? Like SEO, search engine optimization, that sort of thing. Like there are videos on this that are kind of like information type videos, or like talking about like the science behind it and this or and that. But there was nothing that was narrative. And so I think that that played a big part in the traction that it gained. And I think that the closest the closest thing that I found to it was this other Catholic short film. I think it was produced by Spirit Juice, but it was called The Veil Removed. And it was just this short film, this short piece. I think it was only about like maybe 10 minutes long. I don't exactly recall. It's been a while since I've seen it. But basically just going into what actually happens at Mass, and like there's some really cool graphic moments and that sort of thing.
Is this the one with the angels?
That actually, yes, there's angels, and like it's very nicely done. And I think I saw that and I was like, wow, imagine that if there was so much more content like this. And you read the comments too, and like I read the comments even on my comment section, and it's like, there was a comment that I remember, I think it's like the top comment on my film, and it's like, this simple truth is like the reason that I am still a Catholic and believe in the Catholic Church, and that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist. And I think it really told this story that many people can relate to, right? Because as you said, it follows the story of this priest who's doubting in the real presence. And like, how many of us have been there? I mean, for me personally, I was very blessed because when I was 8 years old, actually in this play, and I remember looking up and seeing the host bleeding, knowing that it wasn't real, it was just for a theater, but just thinking, like we as Catholics believe that that's actually Jesus. It's not a symbol. And just being struck by that at a young age. But like, how many of us like didn't get good catechesis, or weren't taught properly, or just never had the comprehension that Jesus is really present? And then being able to hear these stories of things that actually happened. Like you can go to the church where this miracle occurred and see the bloodstains on the floor, or at least like some of the like altar stones and stuff. They're actually housed in the Basilica of Orvieto. And also I think the corporal is there as well. But being able to like see proof that this is just such a very real and tangible aspect of our faith. The source and summit of the Christian life, actually, that's the Eucharist, that's Jesus, and like Lanciano and all these other miracles that you hear about. And I think that's really encouraging for people's faith to be able to realize like, this is no joke. This is so serious. And this is like make or break, because I remember, I think it was a talk or something. Maybe it was a Lighthouse talk or something that I was listening to. But the speaker said something to the effect of, if the Eucharist is not Jesus, then we're a bunch of idolaters and we are worshiping a piece of bread. And so kind of just the recognition is that there's no gray area here. It's black and white. And so being able to kind of portray that in a film, I think, is one of the reasons that people kind of just latched onto that, right? Because it's a bit of a shocking thing. Like, oh, this piece of bread was bleeding. Like, that doesn't happen. Like as Father Peter says in the film, like, bread doesn't bleed. It just doesn't happen.
I love, nothing's better than when you can use your own character's words in casual conversation. I wrote,
bread doesn't bleed.
I know, right? Bread doesn't bleed. I know, right? And when's the next time you're going to use that? You hear conversations nowadays. This is something that this is why when we talk about Catholic filmmaking in particular, and I've mentioned this a little earlier, but we live in a world of ownership, right? And cultural appropriation and all this other kind of stuff. And the reality is, I feel like as Catholics, like a lot of our history has been co-opted for others to tell. I'll give an example. I like the scale of Kingdom of Heaven. I think it's a really interesting kind of film. The director's cut, don't watch the first cut, but I think it actually has some play on not just a religious nature, anachronistic kind of leaning towards negative religious portrayal of the Crusader kingdom and the Crusader era at the time, but also like the kind of political machinations of what do you have when you have a king that has to listen to his state as well as to his church, these sorts of things. And you just get this kind of sense, right? You watch a movie like Silence, and I love Silence up until the last 10 minutes because I think, again, Catholics should be able to watch films that have serious questions like, what happens if you doubt? Is doubt even allowed, right? Where in the evangelical kind of circle, that's not a thing. Once you're saved, right? The thing about God's not dead is that the risk isn't strong enough, right? He loses some of the externals in God's not dead. I know you haven't seen it, and good for you, right? But essentially, like, it boils down to this weird world where there isn't enough sort of risk. And as Catholics, I think that part of us being able to tell authentic stories, good, true, and beautiful, again, is just leaning into the fact that the world can be an ugly place, but it is in the ugliness that God chose to incarnate in the flesh, right? That he came into this broken sort of world. And we see this with miracles like at Oviedo. I mean, bread doesn't bleed. You're right. The Catholic faith I was talking about this with my sister on a way back home from a family event once. And she turned to me and she said, if you weren't a Catholic and you were just kind of outside looking in, this is a really weird religion. We worship a cracker. We just made a Chick Tracks video, right? Two-parter talking about the fact that Protestants are like, you guys worship a wafer. And as you just said, it's like, well, yes, if and only if it's just a cracker. So I love how films like this, it's like we've kind of emerged as Catholics, right? You look at films like The Exorcist, which very much has a priest who's doubting essentially the supernatural apparatus, right? It must be psychological. This is crazy. No one knows how to do an exorcism. It's kooky. And now as Catholics, we are finding the proper balance, I think, of there are these fantastic spiritual realities that govern us, right? The Eucharist, right? Accidents and substance, all these things. And at the same time, these supernatural realities are governed by the fact that they manifest themselves physically. So it's possible that bread can bleed if and only if God exists, and he exists in body, blood, soul, and divinity in this thing. And that's something I love about your film is not just its fidelity to the importance of that miracle, but I love how it looked. I love how it's shot. I want to get into some of the technicals just real quick because I have plenty of filmmakers who are going to be wondering, but there are some shots. I think it's your mass shots that are like my absolute favorite. And everybody else is a pretty looking film, but I don't know how you did it all because it looks so nice. It's this beautiful gold light. He's like vesting, right? All this stuff. What did you give all the tea, piping hot. What did you shoot on? What lights did you use? It was your crew, all that kind of stuff.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. First of all, that's high praise and very, very kind of you. I will first lead with it was a lot of it providential. I mean, you will see like that last scene where they're in the big church that's actually filmed at Blessed Sacrament in Seattle. And like the lighting is just perfect. It's coming through that top window at this angle and it's hitting the altar and it looks absolutely gorgeous. That was God, okay? God was doing the lighting.
Hashtag God shot. Is my gaffer.
But as far as the technical, hey, God is my gaffer. But honestly, I mean, I think a lot of the film, I wanted to use natural light as much as possible since I did have like a very limited budget. I think I fundraised, and it was all fundraised. And then everyone was like volunteer hours. So most of like the money that we raised went towards just some certain equipment needs and like feeding the crew and that sort of thing. But we shot, all that to say is that we shot a lot outside. And so we just had, you know, a couple of LED light panels. We had senses and some fills, some reflectors, that sort of thing. I shot it all on a Sony a7 III with a 28-75 for the most part. It wasn't even a prime lens for the most part, and that's f2.8. And I think that gave me just like enough depth to make it feel like a real film, you know? But man, I feel like even just for the majority of the film, I think I used autofocus, which I know is like a cardinal sin. But
there you heard it first. It turns out that Solenne Santiago is a film heretic, and this interview's over. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Oh my gosh. Hey, listen, I was a high schooler. I probably knew better, but also keep in mind I was directing
it's getting
and
way
shooting
better.
at the same
You're
time.
Fine. Even the great
No.
Jordan Pacheco, cinematographer extraordinaire, has been known occasionally to use autofocus, so you're okay.
Hey, is your podcast camera on autofocus right now?
Shh, I don't know what you're talking about. It used to not be.
But yeah, so shot on Sony, #Sony for life. Sorry. Hey, you're shooting on a Sony right now.
You can't prove that in court, but I am.
But it was shot on a Sony, and then I know that one of the biggest things, and I even learned this from my YouTube days, is that audio is absolutely one of the most important things, because people will sit through bad video, but if they can't understand what's happening, you're going to lose them and they're not going to be able to watch. And so I had a boom mic. I think it was a Rode NTG4 or something. I still have that. I don't use it anymore because I haven't shot any independent films since that. But yeah, and then as far as crew, it was myself and basically just a handful of my other friends. I can just literally name the roles that I had. So my mom was on set most of the time. She was first AD. She was running the slate. She was kind of doing some of the more administrative stuff. And then my sister was my gaffer. She was working on the lighting. My younger sister was in the film, so she acted in it, but she was also, you know, doing some set dressing and that sort of thing. And then I had a friend who was boom operating. I had a friend who was script souping. I had, I think, a behind the scenes photographer, and that was about it, because I was manning camera, and that was just like a one-man department, camera and directing. So it was kind of fun because, and this is what I always tell people when they watch the film, like, also just consider the fact that this was made by myself, who had some background in videography, but nobody else on my crew had any prior experience before this. I just said, hey, here's some YouTube videos to watch. Do your best, figure it out, essentially. And the median age, I think that's the right word. Like the average age of the crew was like 16 years old. And I think that's very much just a testament to the fact of that, like, anybody can do this. You just have to, one, have the time, which I think is the most important thing, but two, just have like the right reasons and the will and just like the motivation to just do it. And I think the other thing that really helped with, you know, kind of putting this thing together was the fact that we all knew like why we were making this. Like, it is for the purpose, the glory of God. We were making it like we didn't. This film was going to be something that 500,000 people would see. In fact, it was initially just intended for my home parish to use on the Feast of Corpus Christi, because again, we adapted it from the script that my pastor wrote. But then, of course, you know, being on YouTube, I'm like, let's just throw it up there and see what happens. And that's just like a testament to what God can do with, you know, whatever you bring to him. And I kind of just keep going back to that. Does that answer your question?
That answers it in spades, obviously. That's great. Now, for yourself, right, when you kind of think of the trajectory of maybe if you want to do other projects in film and not just the ones that we do at the AI, right? Are there other projects?
The Augustine Institute, for all of you listening.
Oh, they know. Oh, trust me, they know.
I'm sure they know, but it's funny. I always catch myself because I'll tell people, oh yeah, I'm working at the AI or I'm doing a project for the AI. And because people are talking about artificial intelligence all the time these days,
yeah, you're
you gotta
right.
clarify.
Well, like I said, I have a bunch of disgruntled trads as my audience. So glad trads, of course, people. I'm just totally teasing. What is, if you could have now the unlimited time, the unlimited budget, but your only caveat was that it had to be a Catholic film, whatever that means, what would you make?
Well, I don't think the caveat is. I think that would always be my desire if I were to produce something independently, because
Okay, so you're not going
obviously
to make a Game of
filmmaking
Thrones
takes
2.
a lot of.
Got it.
No, but because obviously filmmaking takes a lot of work and effort, it is important to determine what is the purpose, and if it is solely for entertainment, it's a little bit less of a noble motivation, I would say. Not that it's not a bad thing. I mean, I make YouTube videos about pets, for crying out loud. But all that to say, if I were to make another like film or something of that nature, I mean, I guess it would be a film. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I would love to make a piece that has to do with sacred art, particularly sacred music. I think that one of the greatest aspects of our faith is the rich history and tradition and kind of just like beauty that comes along with that. And I think beauty is one of those things that kind of just naturally draws people in. And if people saw, oh my gosh, listen to this Palestrina and this Victoria and all of this like sacred polyphony and all of this Gregorian chant, I think that really draws people in, even those who might be like, whatever, this Catholic thing is for me. But like when you hear something beautiful or see something beautiful, in this case it would probably be like some kind of like a bit of like documentary style, but when people see something like that, they're naturally inclined to just want to learn more and to be drawn in and to be more curious, because beauty really speaks to the soul in that way, you know. So that would be like my kind of dream, but we'll see what happens.
So to take a project from start to finish is already a feat in and of itself. But something that you told me is one of the best aspects about the film, I think, is the fact that your score, your composition sounds so amazing. And one of the very rare things for us as filmmakers is often to get original score, but you managed to snag original score, which I think is great. I hope you release an album someday. So maybe you could just take us through what that process looked like.
Yeah, so there's definitely a funny, well, not really funny, but just very, again, providential story with that, as with many things in the process of making the film. But it was funny because I actually had not really intended to have an original score. Like I said earlier, it's like I was kind of just figuring this thing out as I went, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll just find some like, I don't know what I thought, copyright-free cinematic music that was just going to work. And I very quickly realized that that was going to be near impossible, if not impossible. And so I was kind of just trying to explore my options. There was actually a girl at my parish who had a music major, but she was like a percussionist. And so I had talked to her and she's like, yeah, maybe I can pull out my MIDI keyboard and see what we can come up with. But she was not very confident. I was not very confident because she was not very confident, but I'm like, I don't really have any other options. But it just so happened that my sister had gone home for school after kind of helping out with the production of this movie. She goes to school at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, Nashville. And she just randomly said yes to singing at this confirmation mass at a parish nearby. Now, this was a local parish. She's a college student, so normally she goes to mass like at the parish that's near campus, but this was like a completely different parish. People just knew that she sung, and so they asked her to sing. And even though as a busy college student, she had other things she could have been doing, she decided to say, you know what, I can help out this parish and sing at their confirmation mass. Thank goodness she did, and thank goodness that she was able to, and thank goodness that she was willing to give of her time like that, because at that confirmation mass, she met the accompanist. It's a weird word. The pianist.
Accompanist.
And so she was talking to this pianist, and in the course of their conversation, he mentioned that he was a film composer. He went to Belmont, which is like the school down there, and he made music for films. He was a composer. And my sister was like, hey, my sister needs one of those. And so we were able to kind of do a virtual spotting session, which was great because I was like his first remote client, but I think COVID kind of normalized those things a little bit more. And so we had like an online spotting session. I remember putting together a whole playlist on Spotify of like temp tracks for him to kind of use. And then he composed the film, and he composed the entire film score originally. And honestly, like I was not happy with the film or the way it felt until music was added. And now, like, kind of very much more into filmmaking and literally doing this for work, I've recognized so much like how much music can play into the emotions of a film and the way that the audience feels and the way that it connects. It just has this very special aspect to creating a tone for what we're seeing on screen. And he basically donated a lot of his services for creating that. And so that was just another way that like God really provided, and like his people were able to really step up and help make this a possibility. So it was really a collaboration of all these different artists and even people who just didn't really know what they were doing. But again, just such a blessing, such a blessing.
Did you find that filmmaking in the time of COVID, and now you've kind of seen the other conventional processes, right? You've seen how a full-fledged studio operates, how that side looks like. So kind of comparing it to being a COVID filmmaker, did you find that there were more challenges, or did you find kind of relatively the same sort of beats that you would for a time that everyone's back together?
Yeah, I would say that there were definitely a lot of different things that kind of played into it. There were positives and negatives. Like one of the big pluses was a lot of these places that we wanted to film, particularly the churches, it's like it was a lot easier to book and schedule things because they were closed. But in another regard, it was kind of tricky, of course, managing with like, oh, do we need to wear masks here or whatever? Fun fact, there was actually only one parish that we actually, had to, mask up and do that sort of thing, which was nice. But honestly, one of the bigger things that I've realized now actually working with like an actual production team is that it's really nice when everyone is kind of able to just have their job, they know what they're doing, and they're able to just execute. Like they have their role and they work that role, and everyone does a great job to get everything done. I think what was different with my production was I was kind of the only person that knew what they were doing. And so there was definitely like a very steep learning curve. In fact, my least favorite scene in the whole movie is the one we shot first. Big surprise there. And so I think that the fact that it was just me wearing a lot of different hats definitely also caused like a lot of stress that now like I don't have to have coming to work with a production team. It's like I have my specific area where I'm working and I know what I'm supposed to do, as opposed to being like stretched thin across all of these different levels. So I think collaboration is a huge, huge part of it. And it's really fun to be able to now, working with a crew, be able to just kind of do my thing and see everybody else fill their roles.
Well, you said kind of earlier, right? One of the positives was the fact that churches were easier to get a hold of, to get shooting locations. And for our work, we know how difficult that can be. So that's actually something about your film that I very much like, is the fact that it's on location, so to speak, right? Like I know you're using resources as you can and doing the best there, but really what's awesome is I think about, of course, that last shot of the veneration, right? As you said, in Blessed Sacrament, but even some of the smaller chapels that you used and everything, there is this feel that you went out to these different locations. You have a farm, for heaven's sake, and all that, everything. So I think, of course, that there isn't much of a film scene, surely, in Washington, but you've managed to kind of find a Catholic underground in your film. And I think that, again, aids to why so many people liked watching it and do like watching it, because it looks good. It feels, in these locations, authentic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was definitely one of the biggest things we were striving for in the creation of this movie, was because how do you make the Pacific Northwest feel like 1200s Italy? The answer is you don't really, but you make do with what you have, and you shoot outside a lot, because that's a lot easier to make it feel period than, shooting on the street in Seattle where there's, all kinds of things. I won't go into that. It's yeah, the Pacific Northwest, we have a couple of nice looking churches, but it was definitely of a challenge actually to find those places. Fun fact, Jordan likes to say, the miracle scene, the church where we filmed the miracle scene, we actually did not have that location until literally a week before we were supposed to start rolling. And that was actually a really big kind of stress factor for me, was like, this is like the most important scene in the whole movie, and we don't have a place to film it. But again, through prayer and just asking God to provide, we were able to actually find this little chapel that was a part of an old convent. So the sisters were no longer there. It's called St. Anne's in Seattle. And the other really nice thing about it was, because we were filming in Seattle, my crew was based out of Bremerton, which is like a ferry ride across. I always do this thing like Washington. This is Washington. Seattle's here. Bremerton is here. Does that like look right? Can you see? Does that?
I come from Colorado where we just do this. So it might be.
So like, if this is what, well, that's backwards. If this is what Washington looks like, Seattle's over here and Bremerton is over here. For those of you listening, it's like east side, west side, and there's like an inlet that you have to cross. And so it was like an hour and a half long commute to get to Seattle. But what was really nice about this chapel at this convent was that because it was an old convent, we actually got permission from the priest to actually stay there as a crew. And so we saved so much time from having to commute back and forth, and be able to do all of our film days in Seattle and just stay in Seattle, as opposed to transporting the crew, which again is a bunch of teenagers, back and forth. So that worked out really nicely.
It's very impressive to me because, again, I'm thinking of my own teenage years shooting, which were not nearly as advanced, as despite the fact that I thought I shot the dopest stuff ever, which I did not, by the way. But in your case, you're already kind of punching above the weight class. And this is something I think that as filmmakers, you don't understand until, as you've talked about, you end up just doing it, right? I mean, the logistics of transporting a crew for an overnight or a couple days shoot, what have you, it's a location move. It's a company move is what it's called in the world of filmmaking for all you people who aren't in that world, right? It's a company move, and it's on location. And that's just an amazing logistical feat. Never mind the fact that you're doing this at like 18 years old or however old
17.
Oh, even better, right? So 17. So it's just really amazing to me. And I think that it's both very inspiring, but it's also good to just gauge if people want to make serious films, especially in the Catholic space, because I feel like there is this genuine kind of, it's not all bad. It's not a bad impulse to love something because it's good, true, beautiful, because it puts Jesus at the center, of course, our Lord at the center. But I feel like I'm not interested in just those elements that people like just because it's Catholic, right? You might hear I've disparaged. I'm sorry if you're the maker of this film, because I know that you have a good heart, but there's a film called Coming Home that used to be on Formed, and it was bad. It was just a bad piece of filmmaking. And the reason it stayed up there for a time was because the message was good. And I don't understand why we can't have the best of both worlds, but it takes serious effort and dirt. Like, you have to be willing to put in however many hours. You said a whole year. It took a whole year from the start of this thing to the end of this thing. That's the kind of commitment that we need to actually be able to tell our stories, it seems like.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. And as I said, like at the very beginning, I definitely underestimated like the amount of time and effort that would go into a project like this, because for the actual, award project that I was doing it for, you needed like 100 cumulative hours of volunteer service. That was kind of the benchmark. And because I was doing it for this process, I had like a whole project binder and like all this stuff I had to keep track of, including all of the volunteer hours, like down to the check-in, check-out of how much time was being poured into this. And at the end of it, the tally came to some 1,800 plus hours, when the benchmark was 100.
God
and
bless
so
you.
it was very much just like all I did for that entire like fall, basically, primarily an edit. I think most of like my personal time went in. I think I did like 500 hours or something like that. But it definitely takes time and dedication to kind of just grit through it. And the other thing too is like, even when you don't want to do it, you kind of just sit there and you're like, you know what? This is going to be a good thing. It's going to be a gift to people. And if I have to make sacrifices, then so be it. And in the end, it really, God bore much fruit through that. So yeah, don't underestimate the amount of time filmmaking takes, but in the end, I think we were able to create something really beautiful.
If you could go back and change one thing, I know this is the $1,000,000 question for every filmmaker. Trust me, I get it. What would be like that thing? What is that thing you go, okay, I wish if I could have changed this thing, this would have been it?
The one thing I probably would have changed was the actual like effect of the miracle. I always kind of, have to laugh at myself a little because we used practical effects for the bleeding host. And that was kind of inspired from how, we did it originally in the play. And like, I was like, I don't know how to like do some kind of like computer graphics or something to do this. So like, we're going to have to go practical. And it didn't turn out perfect. And in fact, I even remember an edit, I didn't get like the money shot that I wanted to. And so I ended up basically rotoscoping, which is basically like tracing frame by frame, like the blood from one shot to the host on another shot. And I just know that there would have been a lot easier, well, not necessarily a lot easier way to do it, but that would be like one thing I would have maybe asked someone with experience or like found a different way to do that, so that it would have achieved, I think, a better effect. Because like it comes across like you understand what's happening. But I think that piece in particular could have been done a little better.
So part of the interesting thing just across the industry as we're having this conversation is there's a writer's strike going on and an actor strike going on in Los Angeles. And I know that with the world that we inhabit, it's of course independent filmmaking, right? We're not members of IATSE or Producers Guild or whatever it is, but still a ripple in one section of the industry can very much affect the other parts. Now, I've talked about this for years, Catholic filmmaker or not, that there is this micro revolution going on where things are leaving Los Angeles, right? You have production companies like Angel Studios that don't need to go into the conventional Hollywood frame to get high quality productions out. That's actually one of the reasons I like The Chosen. I haven't watched it in a while, but the fact that they're able to do something that can garner millions of views and not have to go through the rigmarole of Hollywood is actually really, really great to see for filmmakers and especially Christian filmmakers, I think. So as you sort of look out on this, do you see in this future for Catholic filmmaking, is it are we on the cusp of a renaissance? I know I talk about that a lot, right? This proto-renaissance, and it's like, it's going to be great. But do you kind of foresee that is the next obvious step? Or is there kind of a lot more mud as artists that we have to go through before hopefully we get to maybe a more common stage for the good, the true, and the beautiful in art?
I think, like you said, a lot of filmmaking is very much, I think, has, or at least has the possibility to move independent, myself being kind of proof of that. I mean, we see all these incredible things coming out on YouTube and people making their own documentaries and that sort of thing. And I think that people now have the tools to make good quality stuff on their own independently. I think it's a matter of funding and then people who actually have the motivation and the time to do it, right? That's why I really like why you mentioned The Chosen, because that entire project was basically like crowdfunded with the whole like pay it forward model, which I think is so genius, because now it's not like they're funded by just, I don't know how that works in Hollywood, to be honest.
Yeah,
we don't even have to go there.
Behind studios.
Yeah, exactly, right. But like, it's actually like the audience that wants to see these things come to life. And obviously, like within the Catholic Church, philanthropy is just such a huge thing. I mean, the Augustine Institute, a lot of the projects we create are often the result, or the what's the word I'm looking for? There's another word. It's often the the result. Yeah, it's often the result of like these gifts from these donors. And so I think in the Catholic world, there's a hunger for these things. And I think that there are young people like me and like you that really want to be able to see quality Catholic content. And I think that the main thing is that like it has to start with you, or like it has to start with me. It has to start with someone saying, this is a worthwhile cause. I'm going to make it happen no matter what. And I think too many people have like the mindset of like putting themselves in a box, or like, oh, I have to go through Hollywood to make something that's going to be good or that people will watch, when it's like loaves and fishes. Like, if you know how to work a camera, you know how to record good audio, and you have a script or someone who wants to like work with you on this, ask people, make it happen. Like, it's just a matter of finding people. And then, of course, I know money is always an aspect, but this also is not an issue if you just ask. Ask and you shall receive. And so I think that that's kind of the bottom line. Like, if you want to do it, just do it. That's all there is to it. It's pretty simple, stupid.
No, that's absolutely great to say. And I walk kind of this funny line in my head, because I think just, okay, what do I want the landscape to look like? It's actually happening faster. I think we are seeing the death of Hollywood in a really big way, right? This is just like the VHS revolution or something. It's very clear to me that these old ecosystems aren't serving the needs of the people, which are us in the seats, right? Which is why Disney and all these other companies are just losing millions upon millions of dollars, first off. But also, I see really positive lights. Again, I'll bring up Angel Studios. Now, they're Mormons and Catholics. We should band together and make our own proper production company. I think will be good future proofing. But I also realize that we kind of move, like, we have to get like a pope who's patron of the arts to kind of push some of these things. But as you said, philanthropy is important. But what I see is a sort of thing where, as you talked about, now you can go directly to your audience. I do still think the aegis of some sort of a studio system is important, only because if you're beholden to, it's almost like YouTube, right? When you're beholden to your patrons, they get to kind of have a seat at the table. And not all democracy is bad democracy, but sometimes it takes different hands, right? Monarchical hands to shape a sort of project. And so I want to see this rise of independent filmmakers who are funded in these independent kind of studio trusts. I think that'd be perfect for me, where Catholics go, okay, we can get these films out to parishes and to Catholics, and we can make them vibrant and good sort of things, right? There, other parts of the Christian empire are really good about rallying that, right? How many evangelicals go and see their movies all the stupid time? Catholics, I think we need to get better at that. But part of that also is that making sure that we have this quality control. So it's not just like, oh, hey, Joe Schmo has a camera, which is good. It's good that Joe Schmo has a camera, and that can gain a ton of traction. But how much better would it be if we could band together just a little bit and like assume these projects up with greater budget, greater vision, greater funding? So that's what I'm excited for in the realm of Catholic filmmaking, because I see our work where we're at. I see that moving and shaking. But of course, I know Catholics who are working even in Hollywood who are sick of the old system, right? And I think that we, as young filmmakers, right, we have a part to play in that, however God chooses to manifest that for his glory.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Solenne, thank you so much for joining. An audience, you can follow Solenne at a lot of different places. I'm going to link Faith Prevails down below, so go ahead and check it out. Give it a comment, give it a thumbs up, give it a like, give it a share. It has been shared massively, and you need to be part of that if you haven't seen this movie already. You can also check out Solenne's YouTube channel, which is The Turtle Girl. So I know that even trads, we have pets, so exotic pets. So if you like snakes and turtles and axolotls and all those other kind of things, Solenne's like a premier force for everything. I don't think there's any exaggeration when I say that. And if you like this video, we'd love for you to like it, to comment, share your own stories on Catholic filmmaking. Maybe you've been turned on to a short film or documentary or a feature that should be on our radar too as fellow Catholics. So we'd love to hear your comments. Please consider becoming a patron as well. There's a ton of fun little rewards. That includes access to early episodes. That includes episode suggestion. You even have the opportunity to come on the podcast and share your own story of what made you a glad trad. We would love to hear that. Until next time, everybody, God bless you and may I keep you. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.